Hi, I'm Will Walker from the William Walker Company, and today I'm going to build a medicine cabinet. With it feeling more and more like winter lately, I thought it was a good time to be in the shop. I asked my wife if there were any particular pieces that she would like for the house, and she suggested a nice medicine cabinet. So I started with some cherry. First, I face and edge joint one face and one edge, then bring it to thickness at the planer. Then, over at the table saw, I bring my pieces to final width, the milling trifecta. This video is brought to you by ToolsToday.com. They specialize in industrial router and CNC bits and cutting tools like this prestige Electro-Blu coated carbide tip blade from Amana tool. Electro-Blu is a micro-thin coating designed to keep the carbide tips sharper for longer, as well as reduce resin and heat buildup. And anyone that's ever worked with cherry knows that it's prone to burning. So traditionally, medicine cabinets are placed in the wall, between the studs, but I wanted to make the Carcass with box joints to make it more like a piece of furniture and mount it on the wall. I've seen lots of complex box joint jigs on the internet, but I wanted to keep this simple. So I drilled 2 holes in my miter gauge to accept screws to attach a scrap wood fence. Before I swapped out the blade, I cut a piece of scrap to the same width as the fingers that my box joints would consist of. In this case, a 1/2 inch, and this would act as a reference key. Then I swapped out my regular kerf blade for the Amana superfine Dado stack. This stack has that same Electro-Blu coating, but it also has a shim set. You can micro adjust the width of your kerf to within 0.02 of an inch. I set my stack up for a 1/2 inch, then cut a kerf. I unscrewed the fence and used the key that I cut to shift the fence over 1 finger's width, then reattached the fence and cut another notch. I wanted to cut 2 pieces at the same time, so I offset one of the pieces with some of that key material and clamped the pieces together. I slid the piece over to butt up against the key, made a pass over the dado, then referenced the new cut on the key and repeated. When I got to the last cut, I just used a piece of scrap behind the offset piece to prevent blowout. I dry fit everything, then turned my attention to the back panel. This is also flat sawn stock, but it has a little more figure in the grain. This piece was wider than my jointer, so I ended up skip planing it in light passes, then edge jointing it to give me a nice flat edge for stability when I resawed it. I took it over to the bandsaw to resaw the piece into 3/8 inch panels, then took off the bandsaw marks at the planer, bringing it down to 5/16 of an inch. I trimmed the edges at the table saw, then book matched the panels and glued them up. If you're not familiar with book matching, it's when you rip a board or a log in half or sequential pieces, then lay the pieces down like you're opening a book so the pieces mirror each other. There's something oddly satisfying about it. There's something about the symmetry. It's my new favorite obsession. The next day, I took the panel out of the clamps and took my smoothing plane to it to reveal that awesome curly figure and really showcase the book match. Then I cut the panel to its final size, which was the internal dimensions of the Carcass plus 3/4 of an inch to account for the housing dado I was about to cut. I scribed a line at the edge of the last finger to make sure the fingers on the vertical pieces of the cabinet would conceal the dado when looked at from the side. I put the dado set back in, set to cut a 1/4 inch dado 3/8 of an inch deep along the inside of all of the Carcass pieces. After I had hand planed the panel, it ended up at a 1/4 of an inch, which is what I was shooting for. Time for glue up. I applied glue to all of the fingers of the box joints, assembled 3 sides, then slid the panel into the dado before adding the final piece and clamping it up. I'm letting the back panel float without glue to account for any wood movement. Even though no one will ever see the dados on the top and bottom unless they're really looking for them, I cut some square plug material to patch them up. It was time to focus on the doors. I grabbed another piece of curly cherry, edge jointed, and resawed the piece at the bandsaw to get another book match. Here's a good example of book matching if you're still unsure. My plane blade was a bit dull, so I reached for my card scraper to clean up the bandsaw marks. There's a lot of history and similarity between Mission and Shaker styles, so for this project, let's call the doors I'm making Shaker since I made them out of cherry instead of oak. That being said, I'm using the Amana InStile and Rail Mission Style router bit set. This creates the tongue and the grooves in my stiles and rails, and what's cool about this set is it too comes with shims to dial in the width of cuts to within thousandths of an inch. So if you're like me and have resawn your own panels out of fancy hardwood, you can match the profile for the groove by stacking shims until you get a nice tight fit on the panel so your doors don't rattle. I chose to use quarter sawn cherry for the stiles and rails because when looking at the side of the cabinet, I wanted that continuous cathedral grain pattern of the Carcass to flow through to the side of the door, but when looking at the cabinet from the front, the straight grain of the stiles and rails would contrast the book-matched figured panels, sort of framing them. This system also makes for a pretty stress-free glue-up, since there's a pretty good friction fit. You can assemble the door out of clamps, then just apply clamping pressure where the stiles and rails meet. It was almost time for finish and hardware. I sanded the doors and eased the edges while trying to keep the sandpaper away from the hand-scraped panels. I flushed up the box joints on the Carcass at the disc sander, then drilled 1/4-inch pinholes for shelf pins using a shop-made jig and self-centering bit. I made sure the doors were aligned the way I wanted them, then flipped them over and marked for hinges. Now, I'm using Euro-style soft close full overlay hinges for a frameless cabinet. That was a lot of adjectives. They make the same hinge for a face-framed cabinet, but I wanted maximum capacity with minimum depth off the wall. Anyway you go, if you go with a Euro-style hinge, odds are it will require you to make two 35mm bores in the door stiles. I installed the hinges and checked the fit and reveal. A bit tight. I bored the holes a hair shy of where they needed to be. If I were in production mode making a lot of cabinets, I would have gone back and adjusted the fence and the drill press before boring any more doors. But for just one cabinet, a hand plane works just fine. After getting everything fit, I disassembled the cabinet and moved on to the finishing process. I rubbed everything down with some mineral spirits to remove any dust, then used wipe-on poly. I'd wait a few hours, then come back and lightly sand with 400 grit paper, then apply a new coat. I did this 5 times. The last component of this cabinet were the shelves. I had a piece of curly cherry left over that was just the right width, and now normally I wouldn't use a piece of figured wood for a shelf, but this was just the right size and I knew that it would match the other pieces of the build. I reassembled the cabinet and added some felt bumpers and door pulls. Upstairs, I located the stud in the wall and marked it with painter's tape. To mount the cabinet, I pre-drilled through the back panel and into the stud, then drove a 2.5-inch pan head screw through the hole into the stud. This should be plenty strong. I used shelf pins to mount the shelves, and with that, the medicine cabinet was finished. I really love how this cabinet turned out, and it was a fun exercise in material selection. I think the box jointed corners and the book bench panel doors and back panel really elevate the piece above just a medicine cabinet, and I hope you do too. Thanks for watching.